Hey, thanks for tuning in to Nothing But Drums. I'm John, and we are going to look in the archives of my public access show. This is back between 2003, 2005, and this is an interview with Jim Lackey, who is considered Charlotte's oldest living drummer. It's a really good interview, and we get to talk about his history, how he started. I wanted to share this on YouTube, so let's check it out. This is from the archives of my Nothing But Drums public access show. So thanks for tuning in. Nothing But Drums. This is Jim Lackey. Good evening. Welcome once again, and I should say welcome back. I'm John Ehlers, and we've got a great show for you tonight. My guest tonight is Jim Lackey. Jim, thanks for joining us on the show.
John, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You're more than welcome.
No, thanks.
So I got a chance to go out to the Cajun Queen tonight.
Right.
Now, how long have you been performing there?
We have been in there for 18 years. 18
years. Wow.
3 to 4 nights a week.
You still stay that busy playing drums?
Oh yes, at least 6 nights a week. Absolutely.
Is it safe to say you've been playing over 40 years?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes, it is.
Wow. Have you ever gotten tired of playing drums?
Never, never. It's a great outlet, you know. It's a great way to reach people, and I just love doing it, you know. Love the music.
Your nickname, now I didn't know this before. I had a guest on my show, and he had brought up Al Sergel. You may know him.
Oh yeah, I know Al, sure.
He had brought up, he was playing at the Guitar Center, and one of the judges with Jim Lackey, you know, Charlotte's oldest drummer. And I just kind of laughed, but that's your nickname, Charlotte's oldest living drummer.
That was put on me about 10 years ago when Rick Murray had a drum store here in town, over on Independence Boulevard. Then it became a big joke, you know, and I've got it on my business cards, and it gets a lot of laughs every now and then, John.
How did you get started? And this is the question I always ask. What was your biggest influence that got you started to play drums?
Who or what?
Both.
Okay.
You know?
I grew up in Hickory, not far from here, and my dad was in the automobile business. And in 1947, I'll tell my age, he built a new garage. And at the time, in our hometown, it was the largest place where you could put 400 or 500 people under one roof. Okay. So when the clubs in town, like the social clubs, the Moose Club, Elks Clubs, would have their annual dances, they would rent my dad's garage. And they would build a big bandstand and hang one of the mirror balls that made the star go around. And the first band that came in there was a boogie-woogie band, a fellow named Will Bradley. And I think I was 11 years old, and the drummer with that band was Ray McKinley.
Really?
And I was really impressed with that, but I didn't know what I was actually watching at that age. Then in 1947, another club had their dance and brought Gene Krupa in there.
Now, did you know who Gene Krupa was at the time?
After I was there about 5 minutes, I knew who Gene Krupa was. Right. You know, you walk in and you see Mr. Krupa up there with the hair and the white marine pearl slinger, and you know what you're there for. Yeah, it was a great experience.
Was this before or after the blackballing episode Gene Krupa went through?
It was after.
Was it?
It was after,
How long did it take his career to get back on track after that whole incident?
Probably less than 6 months.
Oh, is that right? Wow.
Yes.
You know, the one thing I find fascinating about Gene Krupa, obviously he was such a great drummer, but not only within the drum world was he recognized, he was recognized everywhere. It was kind of like, you know, people who bring up drummers today, unless you're a drummer, you may not know this person.
That's correct. That's correct.
But back in the day when you heard Gene Krupa, everybody knew who Gene Krupa was, which is kind of interesting. He was like the Madonna of drums.
Well, that probably came out of the fact that he'd played with Benny Goodman for those years, you know, and did that great Carnegie Hall concert in, I guess, 1938.
Wow.
With Sing, Sing, Sing and all that.
Right?
Yeah. And and he's credited for bringing the drums to the front of the band.
And to the front, I think bring drums to the forefront of everything.
Right. Yeah.
Did you start playing drums after those big bands came through and you realized that's what you wanted to do?
Yes, I did. I probably started 1949, I guess.
Lessons? No lessons?
Nope. Didn't take lessons. Joined a high school band.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of formal teaching did you get at the high school band in those days?
Very little. The band directors then, it's a totally different story today, and that all the bands have percussion instructors and all that. Our band director would just say, here's the drum part. See you at the end of the show. And we had to work it out by ourselves for the most part.
Did you learn how to read by yourself, or did?
Yes.
Wow,
yes, we did.
That must have been tough.
Yeah.
You ever play piano before you started
Nope.
playing drums?
No.
No kidding.
No.
Good for you. You must
Never
have
really studied formally.
Right. So you must have had just a natural talent to be able to pick them up and go.
I don't know. Yeah.
Now you told me you were in the military. You were in the Navy?
I was in the Navy, right.
Did you do any playing while you
No, I didn't. No, at the time I went in the military, you had to be in for a minimum of 3 years. And I went in through a reserve unit, so I was only there for 2.
Okay.
And I worked as a hospital corpsman.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Did you want to be a doctor?
Nope. I just was lucky.
Lucky.
Yeah, they put me on the deck of that ship hauling chains and stuff like that, and I got pneumonia and had to go to the sick bay, and the doctor, who was an ensign JG, Lieutenant JG, found out that I could type. So he got me pulled off the deck force and into his office, and it was nice.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah. But didn't play at all. Didn't play at all.
So you didn't do any playing while you were in the Navy for 2 years? God,
2 years, yeah.
That must have drove you nuts.
Well, I carried sticks and always had drums on the ship, which drove the other guys crazy.
Yeah, I bet.
And
Overboard.
when the ship would dock in Boston, I'd always head in and go to Jack Adams' drum shop.
Is that right?
Uh-huh. Which is, I think it's still in existence, but I don't know.
Is it?
But I met Tony Williams there when Tony Williams was 7 years old.
No kidding.
Yes. Jack Adams had talked about this young drummer in Boston, and one day Tony came in with his dad.
Now,
Little short fella.
At 7 years old, was he a hot item then?
He was on his way.
Was he?
He was on his way, yeah.
After the Navy, how did you get gigs? How did you start meeting people? How did you start playing again?
Well, of course I had friends, we had little bands, our little bands there around Hickory and all that. We played, and went to college for a couple of years, decided I didn't want to become a minister, so I answered an ad in a magazine where the band out of Richmond, Virginia was looking for a drummer. So my dad loaded me in the drum setup, and we drove to Richmond, and my dad put me out, and he got in the car and went back to Hickory and just left me there. I'm thinking, what if it doesn't work out? Because I had gotten a letter from this fella saying cut or no notice, and I wasn't sure exactly what that meant.
I don't know what that means.
Well, it means you get there and either you can play the gig or you're out of here. Well, my dad was already out of there, so.
So you were determined to make that gig.
Yeah.
Wow, well, good for you.
But that gig only lasted about 3 months, but it was fun, and went on to a couple other bands after that.
Name the biggest band, the biggest professional act that you were playing with.
Well, I was with the Glenn Miller Band for
was
3.5 years, 1960 to 1963 and a half. And ironically, the leader of the Glenn Miller Band was Ray McKinley, the drummer who I had seen in 1947 with Will Bradley.
Is that how you got the gig?
Not really. I had been with a great trumpet player of the big band era named Charlie Spivak. Mm-hmm. And we were out on tour, and Charlie got sick, and we had to break the band up. Oh. So came back, and I went out with another band, I can't remember now, but we were in Louisville, Kentucky. Mm-hmm. And we were playing a place called the Iroquois Gardens, and we got back into town, and the Glenn Miller band bus was out in front of the hotel. And I had written the letter to the manager about a year before. So I went on the bus and introduced myself, and he said, "Oh yes, I still have your letter." It says, "But we're not going to look to having to make a drum change anytime soon." Oh. So I went back home and was literally looking for a day job. Was really walking out the door, and the telephone rang, and it was Lenny Hambro, the manager of the Glenn Miller Band, and he wanted to know if I was still interested in coming on the band. I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, how far is it from where you are to Rocky Mount, North Carolina?" I said, "Probably 250 miles. He said, "Oh, that's too far." He said, "Can you join the band Friday night in Chicago?" I said, "Sure."
How is Chicago closer than Rocky Mount, North Carolina?
Yeah. Well, Rocky Mount's just out in the eastern part of the state.
All right.
So he sent me a plane ticket, wanted to know my coat size, 36 regular, and
You mean
flew
you
me
didn't
up
even
there.
try out for the band? You
Nope.
just played a gig right away. That's great.
Yeah.
So I guess he had heard of you on the circuit at some point.
Well, I think, you know, if you kind of get out there, which is the hard thing to do, maybe it's just getting on that initial band,
Right.
you know, and then if you're worth your salt, you know, your name kind of gets around, you know, and people talk and say, hey, there's this kid that plays great trumpet, you know, or whatever. It worked for all of us.
What was more important in those days when you were playing in those bands? Was it the camaraderie, getting along with other musicians, or your performance?
Combination of both, because we had 17 guys and a female vocalist that rode in a big Cena Cruiser bus for hundreds of miles every day, 50 weeks a year. So we had to learn to love each other.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. You know.
What's-
And the band was an excellent band.
Right.
You know, and
Was it easy to fall into the
yes, very
chemistry?
professional. You know, and everything was first class. You know, we were treated like kings everywhere we went.
Great, that must be nice.
It was amazing. You know, we'd go to Cleveland, Ohio, and as soon as the bus would pull up, there'd be this little old lady there with bags of homemade cookies. We called her Miss Cookie, but she did that for all of the bands. It was just the
right?
craziest thing. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you had, I mean, was this something, why would you want to leave something like that? After doing it, you know, you said 3.5 years, I imagine you eventually stopped doing
Well,
it.
I'd done a total for 16 years. I'd done it for
Oh, okay.
16 years,
Okay.
you know. And a lot of that was driving in personal cars,
Okay,
you know.
that gets old.
But doing that way, you were sure to get paid every week, you know, because you were carrying 5 guys and horns and
Right,
a drum
right.
set. So if you didn't get paid, you didn't show up for the gig.
And they didn't get their instruments, huh?
I know. We did play one time in Galveston, Texas. And I had put the word out. I said, fellas, we got to leave at 6:30 in the morning. Well, the saxophone player in my car didn't show up. So I left him. It took him 5 days to catch up with us.
Oh, I bet he was pissed.
He was a cousin to Frank Sinatra,
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
saxophone player. Yeah.
That's a pretty interesting story. I got a couple quick questions I
Sure.
want to ask you. First is this beautiful snare drum we
Oh,
have
yeah.
in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This is a Ludwig. It looks like a Slingerland, probably because of the. For me, I mean the Slingerland, Slingerland lugs on it. What year is this?
It's a 1929 Ludwig.
How long have you had it?
Probably about 5 years now.
Oh, is that all?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It looks brand new.
Well, it's gold-plated hardware on it, and there's a magazine out. I can't recall the name. It's one of the drum magazines. This is one of the 100 most collectible snare drums that there is right now.
Is that right?
Along with the Black Beauties
Okay.
and Rogers Dynasonics and things like that.
Wow. So do you play this on gigs?
I do.
Do you?
I do. It came with the original, like little flat rims and the little clips that went over the rims.
Yes.
But it was kind of unplayable that way because the little clips were not made to tension a plastic head.
Oh,
Because
I
they were
see.
brass and they were real soft.
Right, right.
So the clips would do this,
Right.
you know. So I had to order these, you know, new hoops here and put new tension rods on them. So now I can play the drum. But the snares on the drum, you know, the snares are the same, 10
Wow. look
strand.
at that.
But Ludwig, I don't know if it can be seen, but Ludwig had stamped, well, inside the drum in here, John, it has gold, and that was to let whoever was putting the drum together know that it was to get gold-plated hardware.
Oh, is this gold plated or just brass?
No, this is gold-plated.
Oh, is it really? Wow.
Sure is.
What a beautiful looking
Yeah.
drum.
And it was tensioned, the snares were tensioned from both sides. There's this little tiny screw right
Okay.
there, and there's one on either side.
No,
And it's a great drum to play.
These reissue or
No,
these the
no,
original?
everything is original.
No kidding.
Except for the rims.
Except for the
Yep.
rims. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. You ever
But I love
sell
to
this
play.
drum?
I've had offers.
Have you?
Yeah, when the Lion King was here 3 years ago, the drummer with the show offered me $1,800 for that drum.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm. I said, no, I'll keep it.
1800. This drum's probably worth a lot more than 1800.
Yeah, and it sold for $29.95.
$25.95.
In
$25.95.
Yes.
Is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jim, we have to wrap up here soon. But before we wrap up, I've got a couple more questions I want to ask
Okay.
you, if I could. As a drummer, what do you think is the best city to be in for drummers just getting started to find work?
The best city?
Yeah. Whether it be back in the day when you were playing or now.
Well, of course, the bigger the city, you know,
Right.
right here where we are right now, you know, Charlotte, it's a great place. There's an awful big music scene going on in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Do you think it's grown in the last
10
years?
Tremendously.
Definitely?
I mean, when I came to town in 1965, there was only myself and one or two other people, you know, and now drum players are falling off the trees, and there are a ton of great drummers here.
There are a ton of great drummers.
Oh, yes. It's amazing, you know. And there's a lot of work. You know, everybody seems to be working.
Yeah, see, that's one of the things I was wondering if there is a lot of work, because I think there's more supply than there is demand for the drummers.
Mm-hmm. That could be.
Yeah, so
Right.
I was wondering, hopefully, you know, Charlotte's going to be the next, you know, not Atlanta, maybe the next Chicago, maybe.
Well, you know, we talk to people that come here from Atlanta, like at our restaurant, the Cajun Queen, and they say, "Man, you work that much here?" I said, "We don't do that in Atlanta." You know,
no kidding.
They're not the gigs in Atlanta, obviously, you know, that there are here.
I would think there would be more gigs in Atlanta than there would be in Charlotte.
Well, I don't know. I'm not that familiar with the scene. It's just what we're told. You know, the guys that come up here. You mean you play 6 nights a week on an average? I said, sure. There are tons of guys in Charlotte that work 6 nights a week.
Well, I like to be one of those tons of
Yeah.
guys in Charlotte. Well, Jimmy, we got to get going, but before we go, final question.
Sure.
Who was better, Gene or Buddy?
Buddy,
Just right off the hat.
right off the bat.
All right.
Yep.
There you have it. Buddy Rich was the best drummer, better than Gene Krupa, according to Jim Lackey.
Well, he was different.
different.
But he was better. I mean, chop-wise, you know, there'll never be another drum set player like Buddy Rich. Never. It'll never happen.
You know, I've heard that before, and you're probably right.
Yeah.
But I think there's so much talent coming out now. I think the bar is going higher and higher and higher. Eventually, there's going to be another Buddy Rich.
Well, I watched Buddy play every night for 2 months.
Uh-huh.
And he could get 12 different sounds out of a 16-inch floor tom.
Really?
Uh-huh.
I never had the fortune to see Buddy Rich
And his
play.
drums were terrible. It's a horrible set of drums. But he made them sound like, you know, just great.
Just the master. So,
Yep,
you
just
know,
the
I
master.
figured you were going to say that. I figured
You knew I would.
Hey, Jim, thank you
Hey,
for
John,
coming on
thank
the
you so
show.
much for having me.
Oh,
It's
you're
been a
welcome.
pleasure. Yeah.
This has been Nothing But Drums. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Good evening. Welcome once again to Nothing But Drums. Welcome back, I should say, to our second part of Nothing But Drums. Again, my guest is Jim Lackey. Jim Lackey, thanks for joining us again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we get started on this program, what I do want to say is thank you to all the people that have emailed me to my website, nothingbutdrums.net. I've gotten several emails from younger people and some older people who play drums and that they enjoy the program. So I want to say thank you to all of you for emailing me, and keep emailing me. Whether you like the show or you don't like the show, or if there's something you'd like to see on the show. Some people like to see more jazz drummers, and I'm going to try to get more jazz drummers on. Also, I want to thank my crew. I've had a great crew that helps me out on my show. That's Bob, Effie, Charlie, Ryan, Mike, who couldn't be here tonight, but everyone's got something to do. But the whole crew has always been very helpful, and they've made this show go off without a hitch. So, with that said, we have a new item here on Nothing But Drums. Actually, this is Bob's drum, and this, he just purchased, Bob, our cameraman, a Gretsch marching snare drum. Now, Jim, what can you tell me, just by looking at this drum, what can you tell me you know about this drum?
Well, the drum had to come, I think, probably from the early 40s, judging by the finish on it and the fact that it's single tension. That meaning that if you had a drum key and you tighten this up, it would tighten both heads at the same time, you know, as opposed to like separate tension, you know, that they have now. But it's a round badge, you know, that makes it rare unto itself right there.
Now, I thought round badges for Gretsch were only used during the 60s. They were used way before
No,
then.
they were used back in the 40s.
Oh, is that
but
right?
But on the toms, they tacked them on with upholstery tack.
Oh.
The snare drums and the bass drums had the vent.
Oh, so there was a
like
vent
it.
hole.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
But the toms were tacked on.
Interesting. And this throw off for the snares here, I don't want to touch it because it looks kind of fragile, but it doesn't look like it's ever been taken off because the screws themselves don't look like they've ever been touched with a screwdriver.
I looked inside the drum, and I don't think it's ever been tampered with.
Can we get a closer look at this drum? We're on camera one here. Let me show it right there. Get some good light. There we go. There we go. Looks like I'm looking in a mirror. All right, that's a good shot, John. Hold that. Bob. All right, now I'm going to move it to the bottom side of the drum. Now, if you can get, here's a good way to look at it. These are the original strainers, wouldn't you say?
The original snares on it, sure.
Snares, excuse me.
And that's undoubtedly one of the very first original plastic snare heads.
Why is that?
I think it just says Weather King. It doesn't even mention Remo on the bottom.
No kidding.
I think it just says Weather King somewhere in here.
Wow.
I know the first plastic head that I ever saw, that's all it said.
Is that right?
Sure.
Wow, I've never seen a snare drum head that didn't say Remo on
Yeah.
it. Unless it said Evans.
Yeah.
Okay, enough about this snare drum. And by the way, Bob was gracious enough to donate this to Nothing But Drums, my show. And I want to say thank you, Bob. You rock. Okay, so Jim, you told us a little bit about your playing experiences earlier before.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I was curious to know, what were your preference in drums?
As far as the actual make,
What did you play? What was the kit that you would only play when you were on a gig?
my initial kit was a set of Leedy and Ludwigs. Okay.
I didn't understand the difference between the Leedy and Ludwig. Why was the Leedy named?
You know, if you go back into the history of the drum companies, they were constantly merging, and then they'd split up, and they'd, you know, that's how Ludwig for a time, it was Ludwig and Ludwig, then it was Ludwig, then it was WFL, then it was WFL Ludwig, and it was all contractual things and things like that.
Okay.
But my first set was a set of Leedies.
And how long did you have that kit?
Oh, I don't know. Not very long.
No.
Yeah.
Now, when you were on the Glenn Miller tour, is
Uh-huh.
that correct? What kind of drums did they provide you?
We were Ludwig endorsers.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was so cool. You know, going into a band like that, we'd go into Chicago, and Ray McKinley would say, "Hey Pete, we need this," and I'd get a cab and go out to North Damon Avenue to the old Ludwig factory,
Really?
and Bill Jr., Bill the Second, you know, he'd show me around and says, "Whatever you need, you know, take it," you know, and just bundles
take
of
it.
sticks and brushes and heads and pedals and stands and.
So
Here,
these
take
are the days where when they had an endorsement, they just gave you the stuff.
That's right.
It's
Yes.
not like you get a discount or, you know.
No, they gave it to us when we did the Glenn Miller Time television show in 1961. We got 3 drum sets for that.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
What kind
3
of
complete
cymbals
kits.
did you prefer? Did you get a choice in, you know, if you wanted to play a Gretsch kit, you had no choice. You had to play what was
No, we had to
endorsed by-
play Ludwig because the
Okay.
band, the Glenn Miller estate, endorsed Ludwig, and they
gotcha.
endorsed Zildjian, Zildjians.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Do
And
you-
we'd go out to the factory up there and get cymbals, or Armand Zildjian would bring cymbals out to us.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow, that must have been interesting.
Yeah, crazy man. Armand was a crazy man.
Any good stories?
Oh, not really, not really.
Speaking of
But
stories,
he's a super guy. Just loved drummers. Loved drummers. You
Did he?
know. I mean, he lived and slept. You know, Buddy Rich.
no kidding.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
They were close pals?
Oh yeah, always.
Wow.
Well, you know, Armand was friends with everybody. You know,
Right.
all the great drummers.
I
I'm sure you've seen the books. The old
Well, yeah, I've
catalog
seen the
of-
books. And he's you know pictured with everyone. Shelley Maine.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah.
It looked like he was close friends with Shelley Maine.
Oh yeah,
And Papa Joe and.
everybody
um,
like that.
Um,
I mean, he had no competition too. You know.
good point. Zabian
Yeah.
wasn't around, and
No.
nobody was using Pacey because that was a
No.
company that came out in the '60s.
I know.
So, yeah, that's a good point. I never really thought about that.
So they kind of had the best dance in town.
How did their symbols change since, I guess, from the 50s to now? If I were to get an A-ride symbol now compared to a Vitas ride symbol from the 50s, can you notice a difference?
I think across the board, John, the cymbals now are heavier, they're thicker. Even the thin cymbals are thicker than what, you know, the thin cymbals were then. Did I say that right?
You said the thin cymbals now are
If you got
thicker.
if you
than-
ordered a thin Zildjian cymbal in the 50s, it was a thin cymbal.
Is that right?
You know, if you order a thin now, it might have been what a medium heavy was
Okay.
in 1950. And I think that's because of the rock drummers, you know, that brought that on.
Were there any specific rock drummers that came out while you were still playing in the Glenn Miller band that turned your ear, I should say?
I was a big Ringo fan,
Were you?
believe it or not. Yes.
What did he
Yeah.
do that you liked so much?
He was the drummer for that band,
Right.
just like Charlie Watts is the drummer for the Stones.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Weckl would never work with the Rolling Stones,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, this is true. It's like,
And that's not a slam on Dave Weckl, but
no,
I mean,
it's just
you know,
the
You
feel.
watch Charlie Watts play,
Right.
and he's just the bare bones. You know, just what it takes to get the job done.
What did you think of Hal Blaine, the most famous studio
I wasn't
drummer?
that familiar with him, but you know, he must be on every other record that was ever made.
Yeah, that's what every
know,
top 40
yeah.
hit from the 60s to the 70s
know.
and some in the 80s, he made.
And he's the one that inspired the all the tom-toms with no bottom heads.
Right,
you know,
right.
You've seen that picture of that big rack of drums that he
Yeah,
had.
those were all fiberglass, and he
Yeah,
had those
yeah.
specifically made.
Yeah, and you know, Hal, he must be in his 80s, I guess. I guess he's still going.
Are there any local drummers in town that you specifically, that you know personally, and that you know as a player that you like?
Yes.
That you think are good drummers?
Oh, yes, yes. Donnie Marshall, besides being one of my best friends, is just a monster player. Donnie's just a monster player.
Yeah.
We've talked about Al Sergel.
Right.
There's a young guy here in town named Brian Sullivan. Just a marvelous, marvelous
Really?
player. One of the best jazz drummers that ever came out of Charlotte is a guy named James Baker.
Okay.
And James doesn't even play anymore. He tunes pianos. He makes a lot more money. But he was a great jazz drummer. He was known in New York City, you know,
Wow.
as being a jazz drummer. My old Rogers belonged to James Baker.
Is that
He
right?
bought him from the Memphis Drum Shop in 1962 or 63, I think. Yeah.
Anything particularly that you see drummers doing nowadays that's, I should rephrase the question. What do drummers lack today that you noticed?
Ears.
Really?
Yeah. I've often maintained that it doesn't matter as much what you've got here. You know, if you're not using these things, this doesn't mean a whole lot.
Because you can't play with anybody else if you're not listening to anybody
You've
else.
got to listen. You have
Yeah.
to have the ability. It's like another part of the kit. You know, your ears should become part of your hands and your feet. That should be part of your technique.
Right, right.
You know, you listen to any good jazz drummer, and that's what I kind of fancy myself as. You know, if you don't listen, you know, you're out left field.
Right, and nobody can
You
play
know.
with you. You have to be able to
Right.
listen to them. So it's a combination of everything. I
mean,
think that goes
the
with all
guys
music
that I work
too.
with, you know, at the Cajun Queen. Granted, we've been in there a long time.
18 years, you said.
Yeah, but of course we've been together so long. We know what somebody's going to do 8 bars down the road. It's just familiarity, I guess, is a good word.
Any experiences that you can share with us that have improved you as a drummer or a person?
Nothing that comes to mind. It's just,
Good answer.
You know, just well, I'll be honest with you, but just being out there, and I think I command a little bit of respect around, you know, a town.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been here a lot longer than most of the guys. That's for
Right.
sure.
I try to command respect too, especially
And-
on my show.
And I enjoy going out and playing with these younger guys.
Do you?
You know? I mean, it's just a real rewarding experience.
Well, that's great.
You know, and my health is good. You know, and like I said earlier, I do 5 or 6 nights a week.
That in itself speaks, you know, volumes. That you continue playing and you still enjoy doing it.
You know, it's one of the few things, John, that you can do where the longer you do it, the better you get.
Good
You
point.
know, and I've done it long enough that I've learned to weed out some of the stuff that you don't need that.
Good
You
point.
know, leave out that. You know, we don't need that. Space is a beautiful thing. Space
True.
can be the loudest noise in the world.
The space also comes from ears
That's
too.
true.
When we put space.
That's very true.
Well, Jim, sorry we got to cut our time so short. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks again, John. I enjoy your show.
Oh, thank you.
Really
I
do.
appreciate that. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next time.